Malcolm Carter woke up before the sun did. The first light hadn't touched the skyline of Houston yet, but his penthouse windows were already framing the quiet silhouette of a city still asleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, barefoot on warm hardwood, and took a long breath. The room was still. Silent, except for the low hum of the espresso machine downstairs, automatically kicking in at 5 o'clock a.m. He didn't need an alarm clock. Hadn't used one since he was 25. Habit got him up. Purpose kept him up. This morning wasn't just another business trip. It was the trip. After 18 months of strategy meetings, legal gymnastics, late-night calls, and one stubborn European board chair, today was the final leg. A merger that would crown Carter Innovations as the largest AI systems provider in the airline industry was ready to close. All that remained was a signature. New York City, here he comes. Downstairs, everything ran like clockwork. The shades lifted. Jazz filtered softly through the speakers. Toast popped. His assistant, Lauren Mitchell, had already sent over the latest news. Wall Street Journal headline: Langston Systems may buckle under Carter deal. He smirked. The same Langston who used to refuse to shake his hand at tech conferences now had his board begging for a buyout. Poetic. He poured coffee into his Carter-branded tumbler, grabbed the slim portfolio containing the final agreement, and checked his phone. 14 unread messages, 3 missed calls, and 1 text from Lauren. Lauren, CEO of Langston's been quiet all week. That's when they're the most dangerous. He replied with 1 thumb. Malcolm, quiet is fine. Today, we sign. By the time Antonio pulled up in the Tesla, Malcolm was already waiting by the curb, tailored navy suit pressed to perfection, leather duffel in hand. "Morning, Mr. Carter," Antonio said as he stepped out to open the door. "Morning, Antonio. You look like you slept less than I did." Antonio grinned. "Too excited. Big day." Malcolm slid into the back seat. "Let's make it count." As they merged onto the freeway, early morning traffic just beginning to stir, Antonio glanced at him through the mirror. "Sir, if I may?" "Go ahead. You ever get the feeling, doesn't matter how high you climb, some folks still just see one thing?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He watched a billboard drift past. A white family smiling under bold letters. "Fly with honor, travel with pride." "I do," Malcolm said finally, "but I've also learned, when they see only one thing, I show them everything." Antonio nodded. "Well, I just hope today's smooth. TSA gets weird sometimes." "They always do," Malcolm said, sipping. "But I've got TSA pre-check, first-class ticket, executive boarding. What could possibly go wrong?" Houston Intercontinental was just beginning to buzz as they arrived. The sun had risen by then, casting a soft orange over the terminal. The private entrance for elite flyers was nearly empty. Malcolm stepped through with ease, scanned his boarding pass, and nodded politely at the agent. "Mr. Carter," she said, scanning his ID. "You're in 2A today, direct boarding through gate C15. "Thank you." His luggage was already tagged and transferred. He moved with quiet efficiency. No wasted steps, no unnecessary talk. Even now, he was still that kid from Southside Chicago who'd learned to read people faster than he read textbooks. As he entered the lounge, heads turned. Some recognized him. Most didn't. But the tailored suit, posture, and calm presence whispered one word: important. He took a seat near the window, sipped a second coffee, and skimmed through documents. A couple across the aisle stole glances, perhaps trying to figure out if he was an athlete, a senator, or a movie producer. No one guessed AI mogul. After 20 minutes, an announcement came through. Flight 3487 to New York City, now boarding. First-class passengers, please proceed to gate C15. He stood, adjusted his jacket, and made his way to the gate. That's when it began. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The gate agent's eyes paused on his ID for half a beat too long. Her smile flickered, then returned. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said. "You're in 2A today." Malcolm nodded, offered a polite "thank you," and stepped through the jetway. Inside the aircraft, the cabin smelled of leather and lemongrass. 2A was pristine, window seat with direct aisle access. A bottle of water and a crisp pillow waited. He sat, exhaled, relaxed, until, "Excuse me, sir?" A voice came from the aisle. A flight attendant, early 30s, white, reading off a tablet, stood beside him, slightly flustered. "There seems to be a mix-up. One moment, please." He looked up, calmly. "Is there a problem?" She glanced around, lowered her voice. "We're just checking something with the seating assignment. If you could step out for a moment, just to clarify." Malcolm blinked. "My ticket's for 2A. You scanned it at the gate." "I understand. We just need a quick look. If you'd please step into the jetway." Other passengers were beginning to board behind her. She looked nervous. Malcolm looked at her, then at the people watching him. He stood slowly, picking up only his phone and portfolio. "No problem," he said. "Let's clarify." Outside, in the narrow tunnel of the jetway, the real show was about to begin. 3 people were already waiting. A man in a navy blazer, tall and smug, Bradley Langston. Behind him, Cheryl Dawson, gate supervisor, and finally, Captain Richard Blake, neutral expression, arms crossed. "Mr. Carter," Cheryl began, "there seems to be a priority change. Mr. Langston is confirmed for 2A under a seniority override. We're happy to accommodate you in 14C, exit row, still with extra legroom." Malcolm didn't flinch. He looked at Bradley, who stared back like he'd just reclaimed something owed to him. Malcolm turned to Cheryl. "Are you saying I'm being removed from a seat I was assigned and boarded properly?" Cheryl hesitated. "It's a system issue," Captain Blake cut in. "Sir, we appreciate your cooperation." Malcolm looked down at his phone, tapped, and spoke 3 words under his breath. "Activate Protocol Omega." Malcolm Carter stood quietly in the jetway, the cool, metallic hum of the aircraft behind him, and 3 faces watching him like he was the problem. Bradley Langston crossed his arms, half smirking. Standing tall like a man who expected deference, he wore a gray suit with the kind of confident slouch that said, "I belong wherever I want to be." Captain Richard Blake's expression remained unreadable, but his body language was clear, neutral, detached, a man who'd rather be back in the cockpit. And Cheryl Dawson, the gate supervisor, smiled that tight, polite smile people used when they were trying to look helpful while pushing you out of the way. "Again, Mr. Carter," Cheryl said, softer now. "This wasn't personal. Mr. Langston is on a special clearance list, and our system auto-upgraded him based on status and company affiliations." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Company affiliations?" "Sir," Captain Blake interrupted, "the flight is boarding. If we could just—" "Let me ask you plainly," Malcolm said, his voice calm but direct. "Was I removed from 2A because of a system error, or because of a man behind me who's better connected and lighter-skinned?" Bradley scoffed. "Look, I didn't ask for this, but I have clearance from the airline. I'm a priority passenger, and I'm the guy holding a paid ticket for that seat." Bradley took a step closer. "Is this really about a seat, or are you trying to make a scene for reasons?" There it was. Malcolm didn't move. He kept his gaze on Cheryl. "I'd like a printed explanation," he said. "A statement from the airline clarifying why I was reassigned." "We can provide that after the flight," Cheryl replied quickly. "But for now, sir—" He nodded slowly, then looked at Captain Blake. "I'll comply, but under protest." Then, with calm deliberation, he stepped back into the cabin, not to 2A, but further down, past curious glances and awkward silence, until he reached 14C, an aisle seat near the wing. It was colder here, physically and otherwise. Around him, people were still settling in. A few had caught the commotion near the front. Some pretended not to see. A young man looked up, confused, then ducked behind his phone. 2 rows behind, a couple exchanged whispers. Malcolm sat down, powered off his phone screen, Protocol Omega already running in the background, and stared ahead. He didn't need drama. He needed the truth. And truth had a way of surfacing, especially when systems built on privilege were finally questioned. "Excuse me," a voice came from across the aisle. He turned. A man in his early 60s with glasses perched low on his nose gave a small nod. "I'm sorry for what just happened," he said. "That wasn't right." Malcolm studied him. Brown skin, a tweed jacket, the kind of soft but certain tone that came from years of lecture halls. "I'm Kenneth Moore," he added, "professor at Columbia, African American Studies." Malcolm extended his hand. "Malcolm Carter." Dr. Moore smiled slightly. "Thought I recognized you. They didn't know who you were, did they?" "Didn't matter if they did." Kenneth nodded. "Still shouldn't have happened." Another voice piped in from 2 rows up. "You don't have to answer if you don't want," said a woman, "but were you moved because of him?" She pointed her thumb vaguely toward the front. Malcolm hesitated, then offered a diplomatic reply. "They said it was a system issue." The woman rolled her eyes. "Of course they did." Meanwhile, near the galley, Jasmine Lee stood frozen. She'd seen it all unfold. Her heart had sunk when she watched Malcolm stand up from 2A, quietly, without a fight. She recognized him, of course. Almost everyone under 30 in the tech world did. Carter Innovations had transformed booking systems across the airline industry, automating check-ins, luggage tracking, and security layers with a quiet brilliance that no one appreciated until they stopped working. And now they had just demoted the man who designed half the system they were using. For what? Because a white executive with a louder voice said he belonged there more? Jasmine tapped on her service tablet. Internally, she pulled up the reassignment log. There it was. Override code, VVIP L7 Langston. Internal, no error. No technical issue. It had been a manual override by a staff member, with Cheryl Dawson's login. She stared at the code for a moment, then hit screenshot. Her hand trembled slightly as she slipped her phone back into her pocket. She wasn't sure what she'd do with the image yet, but she had a feeling someone on this plane would. Back in 14C, Malcolm reclined slightly, not for comfort, but to think. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger was a weapon, but one you didn't draw unless you were ready to use it completely. Right now, he was collecting data, watching patterns, building the picture. And so was Omega. Lauren would already be notified. Data packets were being synced. His legal counsel in D.C. would be looped in within the hour. If this escalated, every second would matter. He closed his eyes for a moment. This wasn't new. Not really. Even with awards, articles, partnerships, and billion-dollar mergers, he still had to prove he belonged. At 18, it was the cop who pulled him over in his uncle's Buick, demanding to know whose car he'd stolen. At 27, it was the banker who asked if he was part of the cleaning crew at a pitch meeting. At 42, apparently, it was seat 2A. 10 minutes later, Jasmine walked by, pushing the drink cart. She stopped beside his row. "Water or orange juice, sir?" Malcolm looked up. "Water, please." As she handed it over, her voice lowered to a whisper. "I saw what happened," she said quickly. "It wasn't a system error." Malcolm didn't react. She slipped a folded napkin under the cup. "Stay calm. You're not alone." Then she moved down the aisle. He unfolded the napkin discreetly. Inside was a small, handwritten code. VVIP L7, Cheryl D. The same override code Jasmine had seen. Now he knew. By the time the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the tension had cooled, but only on the surface. Behind the scenes, messages were flying. Kenneth Moore had begun typing a thread on Twitter, carefully factual, laying out what he had seen. A few rows back, another passenger posted a blurry photo of Malcolm being walked out of first class with the caption, "Just watched a black exec get bumped to economy while a white guy takes his seat. # something ain't right. # flight 3487. Within 15 minutes, the hashtags began to spread. # business class, while black, # CEO in economy, # Langston privilege. Malcolm looked out the window. The clouds below stretched wide, soft, and undisturbed. He knew turbulence didn't always come with warning lights, but he also knew truth, like gravity, always pulled down the false. At 36,000 feet, Malcolm Carter wasn't thinking about legroom anymore. He sat quietly in 14C, back straight, eyes on the seat ahead, but his mind was building frameworks. It was what he did. Most people reacted emotionally to injustice. Malcolm mapped it. The override code Jasmine had passed him confirmed it all. This wasn't a glitch, a random reassignment, or a policy quirk. It was a conscious choice, a human decision, disguised as an algorithm. He knew how easily the system could be weaponized, not by the code itself, but by the people behind it. That's why he'd built Protocol Omega, a real-time network of legal, media, and analytics tools designed not for vengeance, but for verification and visibility. His phone buzzed gently in airplane mode. Encrypted messages, already queued, waiting for landing. Across the aisle, Dr. Kenneth Moore adjusted his glasses, scribbling in a small leather notebook. He leaned over slightly. "Mr. Carter?" Malcolm turned. "I'd like to document what I witnessed," Kenneth said. "Not just for myself, but for the record. May I ask a few questions?" Malcolm nodded. "Go ahead." "Did they give you any documentation when they moved you?" "No." "Did they use any specific language about your status or priority?" "They said someone else had higher clearance and that there was a system override." "But no details." Kenneth nodded, writing fast. He looked up. "You know, I've taught hundreds of students about structural bias, but today I watched it unfold in real time." Malcolm offered a wry smile. "Theory meets aisle seat." They both chuckled, softly. Toward the rear galley, Jasmine Lee checked inventory, but kept glancing toward row 14. She was no stranger to subtle discrimination, how passengers sometimes refused drinks from her hand, how they looked past her toward the white male flight attendant for real answers. But this was different. This was systematic, deliberate. She opened the crew channel discreetly, pinged a coworker. "Need you to log the override on Carter, internal only. Tag it Incident 718, screenshot and save." A second later, "Logged, you okay?" "Working on it." She exhaled slowly. "You're not alone," she'd told Malcolm. Now she had to prove it. Back in row 14, a voice came from behind. "Excuse me, Mr. Carter?" Malcolm turned. An older woman leaned forward from 15D, gray hair, church hat, a floral scarf tied neatly around her neck. "I just wanted to say, I saw what they did," she said. "Didn't seem right." "Thank you, ma'am." She smiled gently. "My name's Clara Simmons, used to be a teacher, taught civics for 31 years. Malcolm turned slightly in his seat, giving her his full attention. "I remember the sit-ins," Clara said. "The marches? I remember what it looked like when folks were told they didn't belong in certain seats." She paused. "And I remember what it felt like when they sat down anyway." Malcolm smiled. "I appreciate that." Clara reached into her handbag and pulled out a tiny notebook. "I carry this when I fly. I write down what I see. You mind if I include your name?" "Go right ahead." At the front of the plane, Bradley Langston sat in 2A sipping champagne. He'd heard murmurs, someone tweeting, someone whispering, but he dismissed it. Noise. Always noise. He'd played this game long enough to know that power wasn't about being liked. It was about being obeyed. So what if the guy got bumped? Langston Systems had cleared bigger messes with a single donation and a press release. But he didn't know who Malcolm Carter really was. Not yet. Lauren Mitchell sat in a glass-walled office in downtown Houston, surrounded by screens. Each showed a different feed: social media buzz, stock movement, legal alerts. Protocol Omega was live. She tapped a comms line. "Lawrence, update?" Carter was bumped manually. "We've got override logs, plus Jasmine's inside witness." "Press?" "Already picked up. Hashtags trending. I've got CNBC calling in 20. Good. Loop in Clara Simmons. We'll want her voice later. Lauren closed the channel, straightened her blazer, and looked at the clock. Time to land the bigger plane. Malcolm leaned his head back, watching the seatbelt sign light up as the descent began. He had everything he needed. A public incident. Multiple witnesses. A logged override. A systemic pattern. And one last card he hadn't played yet. As the wheels touched down at JFK, a calm announcement filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. Please remain seated as we taxi to the gate. Malcolm glanced outside. A private vehicle waited near the terminal, and next to it, a man in a tailored suit stepped out. Douglas Hartman, CEO of the airline. He wasn't just there to greet someone, he was there for damage control, and Malcolm Carter was ready. Malcolm Carter didn't flinch when the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're being held at our gate momentarily due to airport traffic. Please remain seated. But this wasn't about traffic. It was about pressure. At 36,000 feet, he had lost a seat. Now, on the tarmac, he was regaining control. In row 14, Dr. Kenneth Moore tapped refresh on his phone. His Twitter thread had reached 20,000 shares. Watched a black CEO bumped from first class for a white exec. Airline offered no justification. Hashtag CEO in economy. In his final tweet, he wrote, "The skies aren't just unfriendly, they're unfair, and today we watched it live." Across the aisle, Clara Simmons finished penning her notes. In large letters at the bottom of the page, she wrote, "Systems don't crash by accident. People program them to protect power." At the front of the cabin, Bradley Langston was getting nervous. His champagne glass sat untouched now. He'd seen the looks, the whispers. Even the flight attendants were more silent around him. He finally turned to the attendant at the galley. "What's the delay?" he asked. "We're waiting for a clearance update," she said, polite but distant. Bradley checked his email. Nothing. Then he saw it. His name trending. Not in a good way. Langston exec bumps black CEO from seat he paid for. Airline silent. Business class. While black. The hashtag was everywhere now. Jasmine Lee stood by the galley phone. She'd just spoken with ground staff. She turned to the lead attendant and whispered, "Corporate's on the ground. CEO just boarded from the service entrance." The lead attendant raised an eyebrow. "He never flies commercial." "Exactly." They both glanced toward 14C. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Blake had just finished a short call with dispatch. He turned to his co-pilot. "CEO's on board. Wants to speak with Carter. Now?" "Now." Malcolm felt the shift before anyone said a word. It was in the silence, the kind of silence that precedes power entering a room. Cheryl Dawson, the same supervisor who had forced him from 2A, appeared at his row. Her tone was different now. "Mr. Carter, the airline's CEO is on board. He'd like a word." Malcolm stood slowly. "I thought he might." They met in the forward galley. Douglas Hartman was tall, silver-haired, and dressed like a politician who'd spent a decade learning how not to apologize while still sounding sincere. "Mr. Carter," he began, extending a hand. "Douglas Hartman. First, let me say, this isn't how we do business." Malcolm didn't shake his hand. Instead, he looked the man in the eye. "But it is how your airline treats people. I just happen to have a title." Hartman paused. "We've already begun an internal review, and I want to personally extend our apologies. We'd like to offer compensation." "This isn't about compensation," Malcolm interrupted. "This is about culture. This is about systems that allow override codes with no accountability." Hartman shifted. "With all due respect, Mr. Carter, this was an isolated misstep." "Really?" Malcolm pulled out his phone. "Because I've got 3 other cases submitted via Omega. Same override code, same gate supervisor, same demographic." Hartman's jaw tightened. "I also know," Malcolm added, "that Carter Innovations controls the booking infrastructure your airline depends on, and our current contract expires. Next quarter, isn't it?" Now the silence was Hartman's. In the cabin, passengers began whispering. "Is that him?" "That's the CEO." "Are they apologizing to him now?" Dr. Moore had already typed his next post. CEO just boarded. Carter declined the handshake. This is bigger than a seat. Back at JFK's control center, Lauren Mitchell received the update. She smiled. It was all falling into place. Back in the galley, Malcolm leaned slightly forward. "I'm not here to make a scene," he said calmly, "but I'm not leaving this aircraft without three things: a public admission, an investigation into your override system, and a seat at the table where decisions like this don't happen again." Hartman looked exhausted. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Malcolm said. "I'm offering you a blueprint." Moments later, Cheryl Dawson returned to row 14. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "we'd like to invite you back to 2A. He glanced at her. "I'm fine here." "But please let the captain know I'll remain seated, under protest." Behind him, Clara smiled. "You remind me of someone I used to teach," she said. "Never raised his voice, just changed the room." Douglas Hartman stood still for a moment, processing what Malcolm Carter had just said. A blueprint, Malcolm called it. Not a demand, not a lawsuit threat, a blueprint. That's what made it more dangerous. Hartman had handled hundreds of angry passengers before, entitled flyers who wanted upgrades, refunds, apologies. He knew how to handle ego, but this wasn't ego. This was leverage. Back in row 14, Malcolm took his seat again. Passengers around him didn't hide their curiosity anymore. Phones were out, eyes followed every step he took. Clara Simmons leaned slightly forward. "Everything all right?" she asked. "I don't believe in symbolic gestures," Malcolm said. "But sometimes the symbol becomes necessary." Lauren Mitchell's voice came through his earpiece, crystal clear, through Omega's encrypted link. "We have confirmation. Press is holding. Your thread is trending on 4 continents. CNBC, MSNBC, and BBC just picked it up. Delta and United are watching closely." "Legal?" "Board ready. 3 documented override incidents under Cheryl Dawson, plus 2 under Langston's referral list. And yes, our system logs match their booking platform. And stock? 6-point dip and falling." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "Let's proceed." 20 minutes later, the plane had finally docked. As the door opened, the first-class passengers began to disembark. Some avoided eye contact. Some nodded at Malcolm with awkward sympathy. Hartman waited until the last group had left before approaching again. "We'll issue a statement," he said. "Public, transparent. And Cheryl Dawson? Administrative leave, pending review. And Bradley Langston?" Hartman hesitated. "He's not officially affiliated with the airline." "No, check again." Hartman sighed. "We'll investigate his connections to override referrals." "And your internal system?" Hartman nodded. "We'll audit all VVIP-level overrides, publicly." Malcolm didn't smile. He didn't nod. Instead, he handed Hartman a small white envelope. "This is a proposal, a partnership, not a payout. Read it carefully." Hartman opened it as Malcolm stood. Inside, a draft memorandum titled Washington Protocol, Anti-Bias Infrastructure in Corporate Aviation. Underneath, a note. "Not for me, for those who can't afford 2A, but still deserve dignity." Outside the gate, cameras flashed, microphones extended. Malcolm stepped to the podium, not flanked by lawyers, but by Dr. Kenneth Moore and Clara Simmons. Jasmine Lee stood behind him, in uniform, head held high. He looked calm, measured. "We all talk about customer experience," Malcolm began. "But experience is not just about convenience, it's about respect. And when systems are built to favor some at the cost of others, we must redesign those systems, not simply apologize after harm is done." He paused. "I was removed from my seat not because of a glitch, but because someone believed they could. That belief is what we're here to address." A journalist raised her hand. "Mr. Carter, will you be suing the airline?" Malcolm shook his head. "I'm building a protocol instead, and any airline willing to implement it will have my support and my technology." That night, headlines flooded the media. CEO removed from first-class launches equity reform across airlines. Carter's Washington Protocol gains backing from civil rights leaders. Tech power meets moral clarity at 36,000 feet. Back in Houston, Lauren opened her laptop to an internal update from their legal team. Subject: Langston Systems officially withdraws from merger talks. She smiled, then clicked send on a proposal. Nominate Jasmine Lee, Diversity Strategy Lead, Passenger Experience Division. Jasmine got the email during her layover. She stared at it for a long time and cried. Not because of the offer, but because someone saw her. 1 month later, the skies over New York were unusually clear. Inside Terminal 4 at JFK, a soft announcement echoed. Now boarding, Flight 221 to Houston. Passengers in rows 1 through 4 and Executive Select, please proceed to Gate 18. Malcolm Carter walked with unhurried steps, not because he needed time, but because he now understood the value of presence. He passed the usual terminal sights, families hugging, children dragging cartoon backpacks, business travelers pacing with Bluetooth earpieces. But today, no one looked at him sideways. No one questioned his presence. And when he reached Gate 18, the gate agent didn't hesitate. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," she said, with genuine warmth. "We've been expecting you." He stepped onto the plane, not with vengeance, but with grace. Inside, the cabin shimmered with that unmistakable mix of fresh leather and morning coffee. He paused just before row 2. 2A was waiting, but something else caught his eye. At the front, the flight crew stood in a quiet row. At the center was Darius Coleman, the newly appointed CEO of the airline. Tall, confident, young, and black. Darius extended a hand. "Thank you for your patience," he said, "and your leadership." Malcolm shook his hand. "No thanks necessary," he replied. "Just follow through." He took his seat in 2A. No announcements, no press, just peace. He glanced out the window, then over to row 14, now empty. A small, almost invisible smile touched his lips. Not because he won, because things changed. As the plane took off, the lead flight attendant made a final note. "We'd like to extend a special thank you to Mr. Malcolm Carter for flying with us today. His leadership and commitment to justice have helped shape how we fly and who we see along the way." A pause, then soft applause. Nothing grand, but heartfelt. Later, mid-flight, Jasmine Lee passed by, no longer a flight attendant in uniform. Today, she wore a navy blazer with a silver badge. Director, Passenger Equity Strategy. She handed Malcolm a cup of black coffee, just the way he liked it. "You good?" she asked. "Better than good," he said. "You?" She smiled. "I get to work where I'm seen. That's more than most." He nodded. "You ever think," Jasmine added, "that maybe 2A was never the destination? Maybe it was just the beginning?" Malcolm looked out the window. "Maybe," he said softly, "but I also think sometimes it's not about the seat at all. It's about who gets to decide who sits there." As the plane began its descent into Houston, Malcolm reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. Clara Simmons had mailed it to him. Inside, she'd written, "You changed the room, Mr. Carter, but more than that, you taught the room how to change itself." He closed the notebook and leaned back. The sun had begun to rise, and so had something else. There's something about a quiet victory that lingers longer than a loud one. On that return flight to Houston, Malcolm Carter didn't need an audience, a headline, or applause. What mattered most was that this time the system didn't look away, and neither did the people sitting around him. The journey began with a simple seat and ended with something much bigger, a shift in how dignity is measured, how silence is broken, and how the Black community, so often asked to wait, to comply, to forgive, took one quiet step forward without ever raising its voice. What unfolded at Gate 2A wasn't just about business class, it was about belonging. There's a lesson tucked inside this story, as gentle and steady as the hum of an airplane in cruise. When we respond to injustice with clarity instead of rage, when we defend truth with dignity instead of noise, we do more than reclaim what's ours. We redefine the rules for those who come after us. Malcolm didn't fight for a seat. He made room for the Black community to exist where it had been overlooked for too long. He turned a moment of personal offense into a catalyst for collective healing. And perhaps that's what real leadership looks like. Not being the loudest voice in the room, but the calmest. Not just demanding fairness, but designing it, brick by brick, policy by policy, so no one else has to choose between their silence and their seat. His quiet resistance became a kind of invitation to rewrite the code, not just the software, but the moral one. Like a steady porch light at the end of a long street, one dignified choice can help guide others home. For those of us who've seen years roll by, who've seen change come slowly and sometimes not at all, this story is a reminder that the work continues. But it also reminds us that the Black community is not waiting in the shadows anymore. We are in the boardrooms, in the blueprints, and yes, in Seat 2A. So take a moment today, not just to reflect, but to remember what a single composed act of resistance can do. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of something you've lived or someone you've lost, maybe consider sharing it with a neighbor, a friend, or someone in need of a little light. Because dignity, when shared, becomes legacy.